when it comes to transfer cases, there's a lot of choices out there. Our two favorite choices are the Atlas II and the 241J. You don't want to run an OR, and you cannot run a 241J or a 241 OR from a Pentastar automatic JK, so that'd be 2012 and up. The reason is they changed the input and output for the WA580 transmission. They reversed it from a male to a female, so it's essentially a completely different case. It will not work with the V8 the way things stand right now. So you can run a 241J from a 2007 to 2016 Wrangler manual, or a 241J from a 2007 to 2011 automatic. The only transfer case you can't run with our swap is a 2012 to 16 automatic transfer case. Now, with that out of the way, we're driving a 15 Rubicon, very clean Jeep, really tight, really solid. He's got hydraulics in it. LS3 430 horsepower engine, probably more like 450. He's got some nice tires on this. I think they're the new All-Terrain 2s, and I really like them, and they actually perform pretty good. I think a lot of people look down on the All-Terrain, but I've had really good luck with them. So this Jeep has our new accessory drive with our billet. This currently has our billet AC bracket, and it has the billet layout using our earlier steel and aluminum brackets. We are in production on the truck brackets now, and the LS3s will follow up shortly. And I am very happy with this drive. The way this drive lays out, it reduces the belt from 106.5 inches to 80 something inches. I don't remember the exact amount. We're using a stretch belt just like GM does on the air compressor, on the factory JK air compressor. So it's virtually service free, and those stretch belts should go for 100,000 miles. There's no squeaking or walking. In addition, this compressor with this billet bracket is mounted so solid to the block, when it engages and disengages, you can't hear it. You might hear a click of the clutch, but there is no, in some of the JKs and even the Hemis and earlier LSs, you know when that compressor turns on, you feel that little bump. But this is really mounted solid, and with our electronics that have idle up built in, you virtually don't know that compressor is even cycling. So these brackets are going to be out really soon. This is the first one that I've actually went out and tested, and I've tested it pretty thoroughly. We did test it on an engine stand and revved it up, and it's rock solid. There's two grooved idlers on either side of the water pump pulley, and the water pump pulley is smooth, it's flat. So there is zero chance of it walking. And because the harmonic balancer is also grooved, there's no way you're going to throw a belt on this setup. We are running a factory tensioner, the factory JK tensioner on this drive, and of course all the accessories go right back to where they were. So the hoses, lines, and electrical connectors, it really is a nice setup. I've been doing LS swaps for 8 or 9 years in these JKs, and our drive is still my favorite. The GM drive works great. It's more work. You need to be careful about some clearances, especially around the passenger side upper control arm and the power steering pump on the driver's side. But in the end, the GM setup works great. You do need to buy the accessories. You do need to have custom hoses. So it's half a dozen on one, six or the other. Now, on some JKs, just because of the way the air conditioning lines are laid out, we are going to offer a little stub tube that's going to bolt to your compressor, and then you're going to be able to run all the factory low side and high side lines. So if you ever were to have a line failure, you just go to your dealership and you're done. You don't have to buy a custom line or have one repaired. Now this JK has 1234, our YF1234 Freon, which is the new Freon. It's going to be coming out. Chrysler's been running it since 15. I think Cadillac's been running it even a few more years prior to that. This Freon's very expensive. It's about $800 to $1,000 for 10 pounds. It allegedly reduces the effect on CO in the atmosphere dramatically. So we're going to see this Freon more and more. And we of course charge these 15s and up with the 1, 2, 3, 4 Freon. It does cool well, I can say. I've compared it to R134, and the properties are very, very similar. When we went from R12 to R134, there was a big difference in the way heat was moved and expansion and pressures, but the 134 to the 1234 does not appear to be that dramatic of a change in performance. Right now, having to buy all new AC equipment and the cost of the actual refrigerant itself is high, but just like R134, it'll come down as time goes on and more manufacturers adopt it. So back to this JK, there's really not a lot to say. It's a really tight, great driving JK that's clean. So when I'm doing my testing, I'm trying to not get it dirty. Everything on the dash, of course, is functional. So we hopefully are going to ship this in the next week or two. And we are doing a couple of 16s right now. And I'm hoping to do a 17 shortly. We will be supporting the LT1 and the LT4. So if any of you are interested, GM has some really unbelievable pricing on their new Gen 5 motors. They've already released the LT1 and the LT4 and the 8-speed, the ATL8090 through GM Performance. Now, let me say something about that. The GM Performance engines are not US EPA compliant. Not even the E-Rod motors are US EPA compliant in OBD2 vehicles. So when you get something, an engine or a powertrain from GM Performance, essentially it is an over-the-counter hot rod engine. Now, GM has great calibrations, but the onboard monitoring, the CAN interfacing for things like tap shift, cruise control, torque management are just not there. It is not a production tune, it is not a production calibration or network. So while you can buy the hardware, which is essentially the same as production, the GM controllers are not. Now, the way we do it is oops, better slow down here. It's amazing how you can build speed up in these JKs and before you know it, you're speeding. I'm just touching the throttle in this, like I'm gonna set the cruise right now. All right. We're in cruise, and cruise is really accurate in these. I just got it set at 70 and it'll hold 70 like it's like the needle's painted on. And we're fighting a headwind. So getting back to the Gen 5 motors, we're seeing more and more of them. We're seeing the prices drop. My opinion, as far as do I go with the Gen 5 because we're getting a lot of requests on that, is maybe. The Gen 5s have only been out a couple of years. The Gen 4s have been out for a decade. The Gen 4s are rationalized. The Gen 4s are fully supported in the aftermarket. We were the first ones to do Gen 4 swaps back as early as 07. And we had fully functional Gen 4 operating systems with cruise control and electronic shifting, four-wheel drive low, torque management, emissions, and nobody was doing them back in 06, 07. We were. A couple of years later, everybody dropped the Gen 3s and moved to the Gen 4s. The whole aftermarket now revolves around the LS3. I still think the LS3 is an awesome engine. I still think the LS3 is viable in a JK. I still think the LS3, when compared to a Gen 5, whether it's the LT1 or the L86, has a lot of merit. It's a simpler engine. It does not have variable valve timing. It has high compression. It does not have air fuel management 4-cylinder mode. It does not have direct injection. It essentially is the pinnacle of the American hot rod engine that really the small block Chevy introduced in 1955. Once we go into the Gen 5s, now we're starting to talk about European technology. 2,000 pound fuel pressure systems for direct injection. Combustion chambers that are designed for direct injection and high compression and low grade fuel. Continuous variable valve timing, which really brings up the software requirements because the calculations required are just enormous now. We are not running tables like we used to. You probably remember in the old days the old block cells and learns, the 0 to 256 with 128 being in the middle. And you could literally go into a block and fatten it up or lean it out by changing that number. And then you had adaptives that worked against those block cells. It's not like that anymore. Modern operating systems are coefficient based. What that means is, as I'm driving, hundreds of coefficients: air intake temperature, intake valve temperature, cam position, MAF, air temp, vehicle speed. All of these parameters or coefficients are multiplied on the fly thousands of times per second. So in essence, when I go into four-wheel drive or two-wheel drive or turn the air conditioning on, we don't have tables that modify the old block cell table. What we are doing is modifying the fuel delivery and spark at its core through mathematical based equations and coefficients. It was in the mid to late 2000s, I worked with EFI Live when they came out with their virtual fuel tables. And what that allowed them to do was basically add another coefficient. They called it a BEN, base efficiency numerator or number. And basically what they did is they just added that as a coefficient to multiply the rest of the table by, to modify the fuel delivery. And by doing that, we can now tune these newer engines by simply adding a coefficient. Do you want to do that? Well, yeah, of course, with a modified engine you do. But these operating systems and these engines are just so darn good. If you take a 1990s K motor, 5.7 liter, 350 engine out of a Silverado, they're running 180, 190 horsepower. They've got EGR valves, that's exhaust gas recirculation. A lot of them have secondary air. Secondary air is air that goes in through the exhaust, not through the primary air, through the intake. Secondary air completes combustion because you already have fuel and heat. You have aspirated converters, which means you're putting oxygen in the converter to change bad gases into good gases. You have obviously PCV, crankcase ventilation systems, evaporative emission systems. And with all these emissions and the state-of-the-art combustion chambers at the time, we're putting out less than 200 horsepower in a 5.7 liter engine with a good amount of emissions controls. If you look at a 5.3 Gen 4 motor or even a Gen 3, we're putting out over 300 horsepower. The Gen 4s are not running EGR valves because the combustion chambers are efficient. They don't need to be cooled down with inert gas to keep the chamber temperatures low to avoid the formation of NOx, NOx, that's nitrogen and oxygen. You're breathing nitrogen and oxygen right now, about 79, 20, 21% ratio. When nitrogen and oxygen combine under heat, temperature, and pressure, they will melt together and create NOx. X stands for 1, 2, 3, NO1, NO2, NO3, NO4. NO4 is photochemical smog. That's the brown haze we see. That's smog. Smog and fog, smoke and fog put together is smog. So, step forward a decade or two. Now we've got a 5.3 liter, 326 cubic inch engine putting out 320 horsepower.